I have coffee, and I have books to review. I wanted to talk about a couple of books. The first book that I read recently was this, by Ocean Vuong, and it's Night Sky with Exit Wounds. And so this was a really cool book. It's a collection of poetry, and it's not long. It's about 75 pages. In terms of poetry collections, that's kind of long. It's average. I was drawn to it through the author. He was born on a Vietnam wheat farm and then actually moved to a refugee camp in the Philippines after they suspected his mother of being biracial. So that was definitely a big factor in the story of this collection. So those ideas mainly form around youth, the end of summer, a lot of stuff to do with sexuality and discovering yourself. But with this, I actually read this on the train on the way back. I was in Liverpool when I bought it before this, and I read nearly the entire thing on the train on the way back, which is mad for me because I am the slowest reader ever. And so I was just about finished as I walked into the door, and I was actually reading it as I was walking from the train station to my house. And I think there was definitely a few poems that stood out to me. My favourite poem of the bunch, which is actually right towards the start of the collection, and that's Telemachus, which is a brilliant tale about father-son relationships and coming to grips with that, and also sort of talking about that cycle of father-son following your parents' footsteps or not wanting to. As far as I know, Vuong's dad was not involved in his life from an early age, so I think that's a really large theme throughout this collection. There's a number of poems which really relate to that feeling of wanting to connect with his father, but also wanting to distance himself as well. In Someday I'll Love, Ocean Vuong, it's as much about wanting to love himself, the writer, as it is wanting to love the idea of his relationship with his father. So throughout this collection, I thought there was an absolutely awesome amount of brilliant structures to the poems. So that sounds super nerdy, and it's something that your English teacher would say is interesting. But the way Of the I Sing, Into the Breach, The Smallest Measure, the way those poems are broken up and divided, I think is awesome. I think it's brilliant, and I really enjoyed this book. I would say, as far as downsides go, I would be really nitpicking to say that I think that I personally am a sucker for storytelling poems, so poems that will take you on a very clear journey of a character, almost as if it's an adventure. But obviously, with poetry, you're not going to get a tale like that. And while this does have that feel of mythology and grand tales that almost feel larger than life, especially when it's talking about the Vietnam War, I think that sometimes to connect, me personally, I love starting somewhere and finishing somewhere with a character, and the lack of closure is intentional, I think, by Vuong, because it's that personal feeling that he might have experienced himself. Yeah, so I think this is an awesome collection. I honestly don't have enough good things to say about it. I think it's awesome. So I will give it a 4.5 out of 5, I think. So this is another book which I found super interesting that I read recently, and that is Japonisme. So this book is mainly about a way of life, and that is told by Erin Niimi longhurst. I probably butchered that, but that's told by her in a really interesting way. So the way of life that this book talks about is told through a really brief story that is pulled out throughout the entire novel, and that's a story about Longhurst and her Japanese grandfather who passed away, but she chose to look to understand a few more of his ideas and his general ideology about life, which was very traditionally Japanese, was focused a lot in mindfulness and a sense of general content, I would put it as. I think this book really wants to be sort of happy. It strives for general happiness, which is, I guess, something that everyone wants to do. It's not necessarily like a new concept, but I think the way this book tackles personal gain is really, really cool. It feels like a very selfless way to want to get better. So this book focuses a lot on like wabi-sabi ideals, which is a really interesting concept, which mainly is about the passage of time and understanding that things will change as time goes on. So for example, this mug has a big chip in it there. I think this book wants to highlight that if you've got a mug that's cracked, don't get rid of it because it's cracked. Just embrace the fact that it's cracked. Because that little chip doesn't ruin this mug for me. I like the mug, it's still the same. It's still got a terrible Star Wars pun on the front. And I'm gonna keep drinking coffee out of it. So the reason that I said that I wanted to be more off the cuff with my delivery of like my thoughts on this book was because this book is centered heavily in being present and mindful in the moment, and it's got a large focus on meditation and particularly forest bathing, which is why I'm here in my garden, surrounded by plants, and there's a tree above me that you can't see. But there's a heavy focus on the natural world and meditation in the natural world, and why that's so nice and beneficial to actually actively meditate in a natural environment and embrace that as part of the meditation is something that I've never done, or not until I read this, which I think has been a really good introduction into that ideology. So unlike Ocean Vuong's novel or collection of poetry, if I was to name all of the things I liked about this book, I'd be here forever. It's thick. This is a hardback, but it's a thick book, and it's got a lot of really, really great detail about different ways to improve your life, but also just to understand this particular way of life, which is dubbed Japonism by the author, and see which elements of that you can apply to your own life. And when I say elements, I mean, this book has genuinely everything. It has ramen recipes, it has ways to fill your ceramics with gold if they break, it's got exercise routines, self-care stuff, which isn't necessarily what I would read. I mean, this probably isn't my thing. I am, like, as I said before, a sucker for a story, and this isn't that. This is pure non-fiction, and it's, if anything, it's a self-help book, which again isn't something that I go for straight off the shelf, but it's super interesting. I think it's a brilliant book, and I would absolutely recommend this to anyone who wants to embrace elements from a different culture that you think might benefit yourself. And yeah, I loved this book. I thought it was great. I love the illustrations and the way it looks, but I will let you find out how great it looks on the inside, the photography collection, for yourself if you want to read this. And I also don't mind lending it out to anyone that wants to read it. If I was to say no to lending this out, then I would be going against what this book stands for, and I think I now stand for a lot of what it does too. And so this book is whoever would like to read it. And yeah, that's this. I don't think this book is fair to rate in the same way that the poetry collection was. It's non-fiction, it's not a story, it's just an understanding of the way life works. And so I think I'm not going to rate this one. I will leave it at that. The next book I'm reading is this, and it's Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and I was given this for my birthday by my auntie, and I think from just reading the introduction, I think it's going to be a really interesting read. So I think that this might be something that I can really get into as well, but I will maybe do another one of these. I've enjoyed making this, and I think that's all I need to do another one. it's just nice to talk about books, and books that are good. So I would absolutely recommend those. I don't normally do a lot of talking to camera, which is rubbish because it's my job. But this has been cool. I've enjoyed this, so I hope you have too. And have a nice quarantine day.